Okay. Okay. All right, girls. Can you, Rebbe, will you get the camera?
Is it well attached to
The Amida in Grand Teton National Park. Beloveds, join us as we walk in Grand Teton National Park. You can bring the whole thing there.
We should bring this.
You can leave that.
This way?
This is a quiet walk.
Want to like that?
You can show people where we're going.
No. I have to be at the front. Where are we going? I don't think this is the right way. Leave that pass. Yeah, I see it. Declare your praise. You're not my lips. Declare your praise. I keep to feel good. But I do. Baby chipmunk.
Oh God, open up my lips as I begin to pray. Oh God, open up my lips as I begin to pray. Die, 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 yeah, die, 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 die. Die, 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 die. Yeah, die, 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 die. Die, 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 die. Adonai, Sifatai Tiftach, Ophia Giteilatecha. Adonai, Sifatai Tiftach, Ophia Giteilatecha.
In Refi,
Legion, Libi, Lefanecha, Yuliratzon, Refi, Refi. והגיון ליבי לפניך, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי, וגואלי, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי, וגואלי.
Friends, I don't know if you can see this or not, but we are on what is typically Jackson Lake. We're sitting on where would typically be Jackson Lake, and the water is so low that you can only see the water way down there. But even in that small bits of water, we're standing right next to a great blue heron, which is fishing for its evening meal. We got some kids throwing rocks. I think they're trying to skip rocks in the lake, even though there's no lake to be skipping rocks in.
Why is it?
And we have a beautiful evening with the sun setting. You can see the Tetons. You might not be able to see it because of the smoke, but the Tetons are just at the end of the open field right there. Beautiful place to be able to wrap up Shabbat. And I'd like to be able to take a moment. We'll say a prayer for healing for our beloveds. And then I have some thoughts that I thought we could share and have a discussion around right by the lake here. But first, I open up our space to think about beloveds who are in need of healing, whether it's emotional healing or physical healing, spiritual healing. And if there are folks that are in your circles that are in need of healing, I invite you to share their name with our Zuma God, and then we'll pray together. I'll share that as a community, we're thinking about Maggie Radford and Richie Blasco, Ken Ewing, Devorah Chaya Bat Miriam Betzido, Mishabela Avotenu Avraham Yitzhak Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel Leah Varech Verapeh Et HaCholim El Na'efanan El Na'efanan El Na'efanan El Na'efanan Mishabela Avotenu Avraham Yitzhak Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel Leah Varech Verapeh Et HaCholim. Friends, we're going to walk back as I launch for us a little discussion about this week's parsha. This is a interesting parsha. It's a double parsha, and the double parsha is Matot Masai, and it's interesting and challenging for a lot of reasons. But what I'd like us to focus on is relevant to why I wanted us to walk down to the lake. And so, as you can see, I wanted us to walk down to the lake because this is a point and a place of memory for me. I've been here many times. It's a place where I've taken my canoe in with my children for adventures. It's going to be a place that I'm going to remember differently now because typically this is all filled with water and it's so low right now that I'm going to remember this place. And it's not just going to be for its beauty or the adventures that it's held for my family, but it's also going to tell a story at this moment in time about the drought that we're in the midst in, and the drawdown of water that hasn't been recharged with our snowpack this past winter. So this place tells a story that's important for me. And as we read Matot Masai, there's also stories that we're recalling. We're at the end of the book of Numbers, and so we're about to go to Moses's recounting of all of the trials and tribulations, beauty and challenge of his story up until this point, and our people's story of getting to this point. And interestingly, right before we get to the book of Deuteronomy and Moses's retelling, we stand at the edge of the promised land, and in these week's parshas, we recount the different places our people have been in the desert. We recount the different places that people have been in the desert. One of the lines we read is Numbers 33:9. Oftentimes we just hear about the place in which we were, but this one I found very, very interesting. They set out from Marah and came to Elim. There were 12 springs in Elim and 70 palm trees, so they encamped there. So unlike other parts of this parsha where we just read about, where Rebbe's playing camera person right now, so you got to keep calm, Rebbe, otherwise people are going to get motion sickness. In other parts of this parsha where we just read about this place, this line, Numbers 33:9, is unique in the sense that it's the place and the natural attributes of the place. And then just later in the parsha, we read from Numbers 35:34. And I'm going to try the Hebrew. I might get it a little bit off. And I'm going to pause for a second from walking. Velo titame et haaretz asher atem yishvim ba asher ani shochen betocha ki ani Adonai shochen betoch bnei Yisrael. We read the following: you shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I myself abide, for I, Adonai, abide among the Israelite people. And as we planned to be at Shabbat in Grand Teton National Park at Coulter Bay, this beautiful place, I thought these words from this week's parsha were quite apropos, because we're recounting places perhaps of memory, places where something occurred. For me, there's plenty of places that occurred here in Coulter Bay, in Grand Teton National Park. But these words are also resonant for me. This idea that it is our responsibility to not defile these lands. And why? Because these are lands in which we live, in which I myself, in which God abides. For I, Adonai, abide among the Israelite people. And for me, there's a sense of responsibility of place that comes with these words, comes with being in Grand Teton National Park and at Coulter Bay. And I think it's an important one for us to all remember as we read Torah, the applicability of Torah in our lives. I want to open up conversation for us to share, for you to share your thoughts, if you have any, about special places that you have, or about your thoughts about this idea of stewarding and respecting those special places. Not just because they're special, but because these are places in which God lives. God is present. So I'll open up for folks to unmute. Jonathan and Reb Sherry, and I think that's Heather Herschel. Shabbat Shalom. Good to see you. If you want to share your thoughts, come on in. Yeah, Reb Sherry.
I remember in Camp Ramon, the Poconos, when I was like 10, going into the woods reading Heschel.
Baruch Hashem.
So, man, the woods are it for me. That's where I pray the best, is in the woods.
So although we're on Zoom, there's a little bit of resonance for you, huh? On this, yeah?
Yeah, totally into the mountains and the woods, yeah.
Rabbi Heschel speaks so beautifully of the feelings that we can get around yirah, right? This sense of fear or awe that can come. And I think he has a really beautiful teaching that sense of yirah, that fear and awe, is the necessary precursor to faith. That we need to be able to experience these things, and what better place than out in the natural world. I can tell you, even as we sit here and the thunder is rolling in, and we recognize that we might not be able to sit here for very much longer, because it's not about us. It's about what's happening all around us. Beautiful. Reb Sheri.
Do you like the word fear, Josh, or do you prefer awe?
I think it's beautiful to be able to explore the fact that both of those have meaning in it. How do we grapple with that? What is that? How do we make sense of this word and this word in the connection to how we can connect to Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? And
Yirat Hashem.
Right, and for me, Yirah is like a powerful word because it can be translated in either ways. I mean, naturally for me, awe and wonder. Those ideas are very resonant for me. But there is something, the fact that it does also translate to fear. There is something about that is intriguing to me. And spending time in the natural world, there are times in which I have an intimate fear-based response, whether it's running into a large critter or whether it's being in the middle of a lightning storm. And typically it's in the midst of those experiences where there is some semblance of fear and a big old dose of awe. So I like them both, Reb Sheri. Jonathan or Heather Herschel, any thoughts? Would you like to join?
Is it gonna rain there any minute?
We'll find out. If we shut down Shabbat pretty quick, it's because we're in the midst of an experience of Yirah with a lightning storm.
And the books might get wet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll do our best. Heather, Herschel, or Jonathan, any thoughts you'd like to jump in and share? Yeah, Heather and Herschel, please.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about the fact that we are downstream from you, and I'm wondering when we're going to start seeing the drought down here, because it hasn't hit yet, but it can't be very far away, given what I'm seeing there.
Which, Herschel, that's so powerful too to think about, right? Is that we're an hour and a half away if we were to hop in our car and try to come meet for Shabbat, and yet we're deeply connected. We're deeply connected. Our places are connected, and so while we might see the drawdown here, and we might see the impact of the drought not refreshing the lake like it has in years past, you're not seeing those effects as strongly, and you're that wondering of what is that impact? What is that deep interconnection between our places that are not right next to each other, but they're close enough to have that intimate interconnection. Oh, beautiful, Herschel. Beautiful. Heather, Jonathan, thoughts?
I had one thought about the terminology. You said, well, would fear be better to say or awe? And I thought, well, there was a book that discussed the problem of how words change over time. And it's called, well, it's by Marcus Borg, who is a Jesus scholar. And so he calls his book Speaking Christian, but the words are a lot the same, right? English is English, except when we're thinking of a passage of time of 2,000 years. And he's trying to think of what was going on at the time of the Romans. And he says, well, the word fear back then meant awe. You weren't afraid of the king, you were in awe of the king. And it's a whole different meaning. You think of it that way. But now we forget that the words have changed in their meaning over time. And I think that's sometimes how we disconnect with our world. We, like you were saying, we connect with Jackson Lake because we're downstream here on the Snake River. Well, we disconnect sometimes because of language and how it has changed. And if we take it literally, as so many of us do, we disconnect by doing that. So yeah. It's a thought.
Beautiful, Heather. I'll add to that. I've thought in our Torah study, we talk about this often too, which is, oftentimes we're at within the context of American Jewry, oftentimes we're at the whims of translators. And so even as we think about that, right, we think about the fact that the word yirah in Hebrew that Rabbi Heschel brings to us, and we see in our texts, that word, if we were to read it, we could translate it in multiple ways. We could translate it in fear and awe. And we could also think about what each one of those English words means and how it's changed over time. But if we're reading it just in English, we're at the whims of the translator, right? We're at the whims. They might choose only one of those words to use, and we might lose the opportunity to understand the richness of the Hebrew in the original text. So what an interesting thing for us to think about, the etymology of those words, both in English, but also in Hebrew, in the original text in which we get them for our practices. Beautiful, Heather. Beautiful. Thank you. Jonathan, any thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up our time together?
Just you know, you were talking about drought, and it's, you know, amazing the difference in nature. You know, drought by you, and in the news they're talking about flooding in you know, Virginia and Kentucky. You know, where there are, you know, cars underwater. You know, depending on where you are, you know, nature is completely different.
Yeah. You know, Jonathan, you're bringing up something that is very subtle and beautiful that I learned recently in some of our prayers, right? Depending upon where you are in nature and how that might impact us for the positive or for the challenge is different. And I think one of the things that's really beautiful, I believe it's in the second paragraph of the Shema, when we read the second paragraph of the Shema, a prayer that we are meant to say, the Ve'ahavta, a prayer we're meant to say 3 times a day, right? When we read that prayer, that's fine, man. When we read that prayer 3 times, the words are about having rain in its season, and it's not just about having access to moisture. And Jonathan, I think this is such a beautiful example, right? There are times in which too much rain at the wrong time is just as challenging, if not more so, than not enough rain. And so it's not enough just to have rain. It's the blessings and the prayers that we say, may it be God's will that we have rain in its season, in the right amount and in the right time. Beautiful, Jonathan. Oh, beautiful, beautiful discussion. Thank you all. Thanks for going on a walk with us in Grand Teton National Park. Thanks for having a discussion about our Parsha and about these beautiful lines that I think hopefully my blessing for us, my hope for us is that each one of us, as we walk through our Shabbat and as we walk through our week to come, that we think about the places that are special in our lives. Where are the places that we go in our journey and in our paths, and what's special about them, and what can we remember about them if we're going to retell our story next Shabbat? What are those places? What's special about them? And to remember as we go from place to place that we do have some semblance of responsibility for our places, that we should not defile the land in which we live, because God herself abides there among us with the Israelite people. And may it be so. King here at Son. Shabbat Shalom.
What?
Friends, let's wrap up. Let's wrap up with what was that, Jonathan?
Going to be having a Torah study tomorrow, or someone else?
Carl is leading Torah study tomorrow. Yes. Let's wrap up, friends, with I know it's non-traditional, but I want to create the space accordingly. Let's wrap up with a mourner's Kaddish, and then I'm going to teach you one of my favorite prayers. So I know we don't have an official minyan, but I'd still like to create this space if folks would like to say the mourner's Kaddish to be able to do so. And I do want to be able to bring forth the name of some folks in our community as well. So if anyone's in a period of mourning, or is thinking about someone who has died, or if you're commemorating a yard site, I'd like to create the space for you to be able to share that name now. So please unmute and share the names of a beloved if you are mourning someone or remembering someone. We're still in the 30 days of Shloshim with Bill Bellis. So Janet, if you're listening, may God console you with the other mourners of Jerusalem. May you feel no more sadness or pain. Janet. We love you. We're thinking about you, and we remember Bill. May his memory be for a blessing. And we also remember our community members, Dr. Stuart Joel Abrams, Todd Bergstein, Ellen Doss, Arthur Neil Fracht, Ellen Hirschfield, Susan Herman, David Holmes, Jeffrey Joel, Stephen Capello, Phil Kalani, Emmy Knobloch, David Kornblum, Hillary Leberfeld, Jan Levinson, Sally Mortensen, Larry Reeser, Ron Sapol, Scott Stachel, Elliot Sussman, David Turkier, Herb Lip, Jim Wolfenson, Elaine Wolfenson, Larry Nussdorf, Ron Novak, Eli Sedlin, David Goldfarb, Bob Berlin, and Frank Lumley. May their memories be for a blessing. If you open up the digital prayer book, you can find the Mourner's Kaddish on page 44. Recite it together. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, v'yamad yirach yirutei v'yamlich b'chutei, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'chayeh d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala u'vizman kariv, v'yirmu amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mivarach le'olam u'me'amaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yirmam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yithaleh v'yitalal shmei b'kudashah b'rechu, ve'elamim kol birchata v'shirata. Tush bechata v'nechamata b'amiram b'ama v'yinu amen. V'hei shlama rabba mim shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Aseh shalom b'mamav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen.
Can I just add something real quick? I'm seeing it on the news. So Jonathan's microphone, he knows he needs to get a new one, but he's talking about Kentucky, man. It's just too much water.
Rain in our times.
There's just too much water in Kentucky right now.
May we be blessed with rain in our time, in its season, and in the right time. Friends, I wanna share one last song. This is something I learned back a while ago, and it's not a prayer as much as a fun song. And I thought being out in camp, being out in Grand Teton National Park, it would be a nice way for us to wrap up, because it's one that I would like to sing with you all, God willing, someday around a campfire with a guitar and Judd. But for now, I'll teach it to you so that hopefully we can join together in prayer and enjoy a song of this one someday. Deep inside my heart, I've got this everlasting love shining like the sun. It radiates on everyone, and the more that I give, the more I've got to give. It's just the way that I live. It's what I'm living for. Deep inside my heart, I've got this everlasting light shining like the sun. It radiates on everyone, and the more that I give, the more I've got to give. It's just the way that I live. It's what I'm living for. I'll do it 2 more times so you can get those words right in your head and in your heart, and then we'll try it around a campfire sometime. Deep inside my heart, I've got this everlasting light shining like the sun. It radiates on everyone, and the more that I give, the more I've got to give. It's just the way that I live. It's what I'm living for. Deep inside my heart, got this everlasting love shining like the sun. It radiates on everyone, and the more that I give, the more I've got to give. It's just the way that I live. It's what I'm living for. Shabbat Shalom, you all. Thanks for joining in our inaugural Coulter Bay Shabbat. Let's do it again sometime, and next time we'll do a hike, and we'll get a bunch of people out here for a hike in advance, and we'll have a little minyan in Grand Teton National Park. But I am so
Thank
grateful to be with
you.
you.
Thank you to your children. Who was the major camera operator?
Raviva Keshet Klayman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.
Stay
Bye.
safe and have a good time there.
We will. We will.
Have
Bye.
fun. Everybody have fun there. Bye
We
now.
will. We will. Bye bye.
Now we should get in the